right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about, this will probably be a short section, is something that was on my cutting room floor for, well, since last spring. I just kept putting it off because I want, not that I didn't want to cover it, just that I was covering, I had this and that, but I have talked about this before. I talked about it on the Perspective, one of our ancient alien calls, I think it was, talking about talking about the time slips or whatever, and I was mentioning other methods of dating and mapping how things kind of went down. And one of the things that I mentioned was using bookworms to designate where and when a book was published and where it's been stored and things like that. We can trace that by looking at the bookworms. So here we go. Absence can speak volumes. The lack of sediment in a flat piece of ground, a track, can testify to the footsteps of a dinosaur that once walked on it. The lack of minerals in a solid shell, a hole, can reveal the presence of a parasite that was once trapped in it. The world museums are full of such trace fossils. But so many of the world's art galleries. So are many of the world's art galleries. The image above is taken from a woodcut currently residing in Amsterdam Rijksmuseum. I guess is how you say that. It was made by etching a pattern onto a block of wood so that the remaining raised edge could be dipped in ink and used to print an image. These woodcuts were the main way of illustrating European books during the 15th and 19th century, and were used for at least 7 million different titles. But as you can see, the print is littered with tiny white holes. These are called wormholes, and inaccurately so. They're actually the work of beetles. Yeah, bookworms are beetle larvae, to be clear. The adults laid their eggs in crevices within the trunks of trees. The grubs slowly bored their way through the wood, eventually transformed into adults, and burrowed their way out of their shelter. The artists who transformed the tree trunks into printing blocks also inherited the exit holes of the adult beetles, which left small circles of empty whiteness when pressed onto the pages. See the little holes in there? Those are where the little beetles emerged from the wood blocks. And here's a nice little chart of how that happens, and you kind of see that they can really wreak havoc on some of this wood too. The beetles only emerged a year or so after the blocks were carved. The holes they left must have been frustrating, but remaking them would have been expensive. So the blocks were kept and reused despite these defects, unless the beetles had really gone to town. The holes they left behind preserve a record of wood-boring beetles across 4 centuries of European literature. These holes are trace fossils. They're evidence of beetle behavior that's been printed into old pages, just as dinosaur tracks were printed into the earth. Now, Blair Hedges from Pennsylvania State University, has used these fossils to study the history of beetles that made them. Hedges is an evolutionary biologist and has studied the evolution of life right from its very origins through the rise of backboned mammals. but he also has a fondness for more recent history. He loves Renaissance art and history, and his main website is adorned with pictures of woodcuts. He has another site with scanned images of 1,100 historical maps from the Caribbean. Hedges chose not to study actual woodblocks, even though many are well preserved. That's because even now these can still attract new beetles that leave fresh wormholes in the wood. There's no way of telling how old a particular hole is. Instead, Hedges looks at the prints in actual books, since the books bear their dates and places of publication. Hedges could also trace the provenance of each hole to a specific year and country. He studied more than 3,200 such holes made between 1462 and 1899. Those from Northern Europe, including England, Germany, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia, were round and just 1.4 millimeters wide on average. Those from Southern Europe, including Spain, Portugal, Italy, and most of France, were large, with an average diameter of 2.3 millimeters. So we're seeing some geographic difference between where the different beetle groups came from and where they were thriving at, and we'll see how that changes over time. The southern holes also included many long tracks that were made when the beetle, rather than burrowing straight out, exited from the wood in diagonal paths that followed the grain. These two holes were made by a separate species of beetle, and through a process of elimination, Hedges identified the culprits: the common furniture beetle, Enobium punctatum in northern Europe, and the Mediterranean furniture beetle, Oligomerus tilinoides, in southern Europe. Only these species make holes of the appropriate size, attack the same type of wood used to make the woodcuts, and were found on the right continent. Until Hedges came along, we had no idea how either species was spread historically, but the woodcuts reveal that they were separated by an invisible line which kept the common furniture beetle to the north and the Mediterranean one to the south. For 4 centuries, where one beetle was found, the other was not. While the common furniture beetle is more sensitive to higher temperatures and low humidity, it seems likely that it was kept out of the south by competition from the Mediterranean cousin. But this separation is no more. Both beetles are now found throughout most of Europe. As trade and commerce across the continent increased, the beetles expanded, not just in wood blocks, but also furniture, housing materials, and more. The stable indoor environments of buildings would have sheltered them from I guess that's supposed to be from, got form here, but from the climatic predilections, and allow them to gain a foothold in new areas. So here are their ranges previously, and then their modern day ranges, of course, are mixed, except for the very northern reaches of the environment. It looks like they lack the Mediterranean furniture beetle, but other than that, they are pretty widespread as well. Hedges thinks that other woodcuts can tell us about the histories of beetles from other parts of the world too. There are other regions around the world that have a long history of woodcut use, including in Japan, in China, and in the Americas. He says Benjamin Franklin had his own printing house in Philadelphia and made some famous woodcut prints, such as Join or Die. Different species of wood-borne insects have made their mark on those woodcuts as well, and discovering their history in the same way is now possible. So really cool stuff about understanding the history and evolution of these woodcut beetles, these furniture beetles that left their mark on history, that left a modern fossil, a modern trace fossil for us to understand how they diverged and why, where they lived, and how that's changed over time. Super interesting stuff. I love looking into bugs. You guys know that. And I enjoy sharing this stuff when I find it with you guys. So I appreciate everybody for popping in to watch Live from the Hive today, to recap on what we've done. In Cryptic Corner, we had the Lost City of Dolly 2, which was a AI fabrication. We had in Creation Watch, we had the enigmatic Jonathan Guzman, who wanted to talk about dinosaurs and birds, and that was a fun topic. And then, of course, we wrap things up today with the wormholes in old books and bookshelves and furniture, and how they can tell us where and when different species of furniture beetles lived, and how the climate, and that, it didn't really go into that too much, but yes, climate does come into play, and we can look at that and see some climatic shifts as well. So that is what we covered for Life from the Hive today.